Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We've got an exciting book review for you all here. We've gotten to read The Living Force, the newest novel by John Jackson Miller for Star Wars canon. It takes place a year before The Phantom Menace and features not one, not two, but every member of the Jedi Council from The Phantom Menace in the novel, as well as Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a variety of other characters. We're going to give you our thoughts here in our review, our score at the end. Before we do so, make sure you're hitting that like button. Helps us out a lot, helps us with the channel get out to more Star Wars book fans. Also, make sure you're subscribed. We do review every single Star Wars canon book the day it comes out. And if you've read The Living Force or you're thinking about reading The Living Force, let us know in the comments below what you thought. To get into this book, again, we always remind you this is a non-spoiler review, so you don't have to be worried about us giving away plot details. But let's start first talking about our general thoughts, our general reaction to this book, with a focus on the structure, the writing, the way the narrative went out. Sanak, what'd you think when you were reading The Living Force, and how'd you enjoy the overall pacing structure of this book?
I mean, this was a fun read. They don't really try to overdo it on the story. I think it's more that the world building is very diverse and there's different pieces. Like the whole concept of the world being a bunch of different keys, different islands. That nice little digital map that they're providing, or the map that they're giving out in the hardcover copy, that's a great way to like really dive into a little bit more of a very prequel story. This is like the Jedi that I think everyone in 1997 kind of expected to see, right? Not necessarily entirely perfect, but still keepers of the peace, great personalities, and having a great time doing what they want to do, but still reminding themselves that, hey, above all else, we have to take care of the people in the galaxy. We have to take care to listen to the Force and listen to the will of it. I think its structure is where it can be its greatest strength, but sometimes also a bit of its weakness. Definitely relies heavily on the characters and the character partnerships that are formed here. And it's great in the sense that I really got to appreciate a lot of different Jedi Masters that don't really get a lot of time, and even Legends necessarily. Here we get to see a lot about what makes them tick. It's a great read because at no point did I ever really feel like there was something that was going to get a little boring or distracting, because the perspective was always changing. It was never stuck on one protagonist who is a little weaker than the rest and the other one who's the one carrying the story. And oftentimes it was a revolving door and different partnerships started appearing together, and sometimes partnerships came together. So the story being told with these characters, really well thought out, but it is in some ways fairly simple. And I think that is the nature of being set just before the Phantom Menace. They can't necessarily make a villain that is overwhelmingly powerful or sinister, but I still thought that at least the plotting and the structure around the villain's plan was pretty solid. I never felt like I was being pulled away from the villain story in like 15, 20 directions. The only time I ever felt that way was because she's interacting with so many different criminal organizations, but then the story kind of resolves itself and like streamlines it. So yeah, it was good. I really did enjoy myself. It's a canon junkie book. There's so many Easter eggs. Yeah, I think if you want characters to shine and you don't really care too much about ultimately where the plot lands, this is the book for you. If you at least like the creative design and world behind it that John Jackson Miller brings here, you're gonna have a fun time reading this.
As for canon, I liken it more to Brotherhood than anything else. When it's over, you remember all the fun times you had with the Jedi Council, especially a Phantom Menace Jedi Council, which doesn't get much limelight considering we see so much of the Attack of the Clones Jedi Council in the Clone Wars, and then Revenge of the Sith piggybacks off that. When the plot is Jedi Council focused, it works best. Like you were mentioning with the villain, I think the villain is interesting and out of context, like this villain's plans aren't so maniacal that she's after the Jedi right at the beginning. It's almost happenstance that she comes a part of this story. And so, because of that, I thought this was a nice kind of refreshing change of pace for a villain, a villain that is singular in her desires and her wants, but also kind of a part of something that is at least formidable enough to the Jedi that it poses a bit of an issue. As for the pacing and plot of this book, I found the plot to be very nice. Like there's very few Star Wars books we read nowadays, especially with how grand the High Republic is or tie-ins to other things. There's very few Star Wars books you read nowadays where you just go, that was a simple but yet effective plot. Basically, the plot of this book revolves around one thing, which is Qui-Gon Jinn telling the Jedi Council to just help one person. And the entire book is very much so about helping people. How do the Jedi connect to people? And I think when we see the Jedi in the prequels, they're so disconnected. It's nice to see a book where we talk about the Acolyte being the end of the High Republic. This feels like the end of the High Republic to me. Like this feels very High Republic the way it's written. Very much so a focus on the Jedi, what they're feeling, how they deal with situations, awkward situations, difficult situations. How do they go about it? And I thought John Jackson Miller's writing was excellent. I thought he really handled character very well. A lot of his best books are character centric. Similar voices, obviously, also continuing with like Yoda and Yaddle, feeling very much so aligned with what we've seen of their more expanded character in the last few years. So I loved what he did here in particular with a concept that wasn't necessarily a one that had much weight to it. My one critique of the pacing of the story would be in the second part. The second part is very long. I felt like even though there's a lot of inciting action in that because the first part's mostly setup, it did a little bit overstay its welcome. Most of it has to do with the fact there are so many characters that you're constantly shifting perspectives. And like you were saying, Sanak, I think that is something that keeps it refreshing, even though beat by beat points of the plot are dragged out much longer than they really need to be in that second part. And the chapters, I also thought he did a good job of keeping the chapters brief enough to where you're turning the pages and keep going. If there's not much going on with one set of characters, the next chapter might have something that's more exciting going on with other sets of characters. So I thought the flow was nice, but the second part I did feel a little bit of it dragging. But let's get into character. We're not going to talk about every single character because there are so many. Like I said, 14 main characters plus the villain. We're going to talk briefly here about our favorite members of the Jedi Council in this. There are a lot of them, and they all do get some great time to shine in their own right. Which duos or which characters specifically to you, Sanak, did you find the most surprising or interesting in this book that you frankly were like, I'm not sure they're going to be the ones I remember after leaving this book, but now you can't imagine having the living force without them?
Yeah, I think interesting one for sure was Adi Gallia and Yoda. That was not a partnership I was really thinking about, and understanding her background, how she's such an analytical mind and all that, but is also just like a really accepting and wonderful Jedi who's always interested in learning and like kind of like leaning on the other Jedi that she's around. For someone like Yoda, he's always going to have a little bit of fun and like, point out some things from his centuries of wisdom, and she quickly like caught on to some of his qualities. One of my favorite ones was a duo plus one other Jedi, and that's Saesee Tiin and Plo Koon. I've always liked Plo quite a bit. I mean, he's got some of the hardest hitting lines in the Clone Wars. Here, he's a little bit more awkward and stiff because he's with Saesee, who's like, I never really understood that he's just angry all the time. Like, I thought he's just stern. Yarael Poof, just love the guy. Love that he's literally just a class clown, and he's quite literally saying, I've done things for too many centuries now. This century, I'm gonna do something different, and then he just becomes a mascot. Evan Piell, like I loved his role too, and like how he handled the school storyline. That was quite solid there. I have a little bit more respect as a certified Mace Windu hater. I definitely have a little bit more respect for him, and Depa definitely carries a strong emotional undercurrent for this story. But if there's someone that I think misunderstood some of like what they were on this mission for, it's Mundi. Like he had some great scenes, but I think John Jackson Miller definitely wrote him, and as he wrote a lot of these characters with that like kind of Lucasfilm story group backing, tracking of like all the characters, the reception to them, how they're kind of changed legacy wise. He doesn't necessarily learn or grow even temporarily. Like a lot of it feels like it gets undone for him by the end because he's like, I've done it. I think he's dropping a little bit for me. I appreciated Mace Windu a little bit more here, which it's tough for me to say that, but he I feel like this is the Mace that I enjoyed in the Phantom Menace. This is the Mace that I felt like I think I would have loved as a Jedi, but then I see how he becomes more in the Clone Wars, and Revenge of the Sith especially. So, and Eeth Koth, I don't want to forget him because he's got one of the strangest storylines here, but there's a lot of like setup for who he is and who he's going to become, and he's got one of the more interesting ends that still hasn't been fully explored to his storyline. Like we know the literal end, but we don't know why he's in that position quite yet. Yeah, great stuff all around. I wanted to limit myself with the characters here, but they're all really lovable by the end of the story.
Yeah, I think you mentioned every single one, but that's kind of the point. John Jackson Miller does such a great job touching on every single character. Each character I now feel is better having been in this book. Standout, one of my favorite characters because he was a goofy background character really until this and some stuff in Legends was Yarael Poof. I loved Yarael Poof and Mundi together. I'd agree Mundi is the least focused on character in this, although he has a very fun exchange with some Star Wars ice cream. But Yarael Poof, their dynamic, which mostly is at the beginning of the book and the end of the book, I found hilarious, and I really enjoyed Yarael Poof's writing in this. Although he is more comedic relief than character, I do think Eeth Koth has one of the most interesting arcs in the book, and I very much so was fascinated to see how it goes because that's an arc that does start a little later throughout the book. The first half of the book, he's not really a focus. Yaddle has been one of my favorite Jedi in Star Wars canon. I think somebody who's been dramatically improved, even though she had good stuff in Legends before. Absolutely, with the addition of High Republic, has become one of my favorites. In Cataclysm, that book does so much for Yaddle, even more so than Tales of the Jedi for me. I just absolutely love her character. So it was fun to see her here, especially with the gruff Evan Piell, because Evan Piell is very much so the same character you see in Citadel. But here he has a surprising connection with children and trying to help them grow. And I'm going to piggyback off of Mace Windu. I thought Mace Windu here also, like Mundi, one that doesn't get much page time. However, what they do with his character, I feel like that's maybe deliberate because of Glass Abyss coming out later this year. It's so Mace Windu focused. They maybe took a step back from Mace Windu for this story. But what Depa Billaba means to this story, the way she is the main character, basically, if you want to take one Jedi who has the most page time, it is Depa Billaba. And because she was Mace Windu's Padawan, there's something sweet here from Mace that you don't ever see. You never see that. Even in Shatterpoint, it's more of an obligation or a responsibility reason. Like, this is my Padawan who's now running amok. I got to go stop it. Here, everything he does to try to help Depa comes from a place that even he's denying as like an attachment place. And that's what this whole book is really about. It's like, how do you separate the ideas of attachment for Jedi from what it means to help one singular person? And I thought that was a really interesting idea, something that the Miller does a great job exploring throughout this whole book. Even though they're not members of the Jedi Council, the few scenes with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were hilarious, and they have a great dynamic here. The way they play off each other, this is peak Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan being a dynamic duo. So I really enjoyed all of that. And that wasn't even every character. So there's so much to talk about with the characters here. This is a character-centric book. Absolutely loved what we got here, but we got to move on to our score. Sanak, we give this a score out of 5. What were your final thoughts here? Wrap up for The Living Force, and what would you rate it out of 5?
I think you can tell by our character section that this is a book about the characters, and it's great that now every character here, even if you didn't necessarily need more story from them, they have a foundational voice in canon. If you're getting like the need to like get a book that has plot galore, that is so important and impactful to what's happening in the state of the galaxy just before, you're not going to necessarily get that. You get a lot of setup. So I would give this a 3.75 out of 5. I think it's so close to greatness, but the nature of when and where the story is told, I think, naturally hinders just how much it can be achieved by John Jackson.
I think this is a really well written book with great characters. Plot, there's not much here. It's a very simple, straightforward plot, but that's kind of the point of the book, that it's simple. It's about the Jedi before their downfall and the inciting instant that causes their downfall, which is the death of Qui-Gon Jinn, and he's the impetus for starting this story. I think this is a book like a lot of character books that maybe in a year from now, 6 months from now, this might rise in how I feel about it. I really want to give it a 4. Like, I'm very close, but I did write down right after my review 3.75. Going back and forth on it, Maybe I'll give it a 3.85 because I'm so close. But when it was all said and done, it's just one of those books that leaves you with a big smile on your face. And maybe that's the prequel kid in me, but I really enjoyed it. So let us know what you think of The Living Force in the comments below. What did you think of it? Did our thoughts sway you one way or another? Do you think you might read it now if you weren't going to? If you haven't liked the video yet, really helps us out. Like the video and subscribe to the channel for new Star Wars book reviews every single time they come out. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you all in the next one.